Okay, here we are at Q3 of 2024, and we have a little bit of a different market update for you today. We all three have some very important news to share for you. We are going to skip the stats because the stats pretty much just look the same as they have for the last several months. So we're going to start with Ken, and I just want to blurt out the good news that Ken has, but I'll let you deliver the goods. And then I'll jump in and just discuss some new news that's happening with buyers and very similar kind of news that's also going to be happening with sellers.
Big stuff.
So stick around for that, but let's take it away with Ken.
Fantastic. So the big news is rates are going the right direction. It's not a dramatic increase, but I have had things in the high sixes and low sevens recently, which is upwards of 0.5% lower than they've been in the last 90-ish days. So mortgage-backed securities, which is what controls mortgage rates, have gone up recently, which makes rates go down, and we're about the best levels we've been at 90 days. Not quite the best levels in the last year, which was last June, but close to that, and the Fed has pretty much signaled this next cut. The Fed meets this week. They're going to have an announcement on the 31st. We're not really anticipating any movement there. It's just going to be the language of that meeting, but everybody thinks the September meeting is a lock for a cut of either 0.25%, but possibly even 0.5%. So last Friday was the PCE report, which is the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. It's the personal consumption expenditure, and that was cool and going the right direction. The month-over-month number was 0.18, and if you annualize that, it would come out to 2.16, so very close to the Fed's target of 2%. So that's why everybody believes the September meeting is a lock for a cut, and the other information that's pushing the Fed to go that direction is weaker labor information. So there was a report that came out today showing some weakness, revisions of last month's report, and then this Friday is the BLS monthly report as well. So as they revise these old reports, they start to peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, and see that they were really overstating jobs previously. So that points to a weak labor market, and as inflation comes into check, rates will go the right direction.
And so also the kind of exciting thing that I'm understanding, and let me know if I'm wrong here, but September is most likely just the beginning of the trend to continue on into 2025 and even 2026 potentially. That's what people are saying.
Yeah, that's the wild card. I mean, so the hike cycle is over, and that would be the beginning of the cut cycle. It's just is it gonna be 0.25% every meeting, like they did the hike 0.25% every meeting for the last year and a half roughly? They will always say it's data dependent, of course, but yeah, cut cycle would be welcomed, of course, and we'll just see how frequent. I don't know if it's gonna go into 26.
So as of now, we're gonna be sitting in the high sixes. And once we hit September, we should still be sitting in the high sixes, right? And then we don't really know what's going to happen. We're projected to see more cuts next year, but we don't know when and we don't know how much.
Right.
So we were hoping to be like back down towards the fives by the end of this year, which obviously we're not.
Correct.
But sometime next year.
That's the hope, and thinking with my heart a little bit, but I do think the data is pointing us that direction.
Okay, so how much money are people saving with these rate cuts? Say they have a $500,000 mortgage. What does that look like on a monthly basis?
A full point on a $500,000 loan would be roughly $330 a month. So if you went from 7% to 6%, your payment would be about $330 lower, which is why that temporary buy down strategy we've been employing for the last 12 months is such a great tool to help bridge that gap to the 5 target that we all feel like we need to free up some inventory and encourage some sellers to give up their current low rate. So that would be the impact of rates moving down. And it just leads me to something I've been saying for the last year about time being the enemy for buyers, because the cost of waiting is getting really expensive. As appreciations continue to go up, that's forecast to continue to happen. And as rates come down, that's going to bring more and more buyers to the market and create more competition and most likely drive up prices potentially further. I know that's going to be very geographic specific or market specific, not universal. So I do think time is the enemy for buyers.
So next up, we're going to cover some significant changes that are going on in our world due to the recent National Association of Realtors settlement. So I'm going to cover what's going on for buyers, and then Heather's going to cover what's going on for sellers. But first, Heather, in our last market update video, you said that we were expecting these changes to occur around August 17th. And here we are talking about it. We're not even quite to August yet. So what's going on?
That's a great question, Colin, and we do find that we are already in the thick of these changes. So it's the deadline that is August 17th, but the two entities that we rely on to do business as realtors and to help all of you through your transactions are the California Association of Realtors and our MLS system. There are over 190,000 realtors in the California Association of Realtors, and We use a form system called zip forms, and the California Association of Realtors went ahead and already changed those forms this week. So we're operating under the new forms, and our MLS is going to be complying with the settlement rules as of August 13th. So some of the major changes are going to be happening now, and the rest will follow August 13th.
Well, that makes sense. Thanks for clearing that up for us. Okay, so there's going to be two big changes for buyers. So first, buyers must now sign a written agreement before going and seeing any properties. And second, the realtor compensation model has changed. So what you need to know as a buyer for the first change is that you'll need to sign a written agreement now that functions very similarly to how a listing agreement functions for a seller. Open houses are an exception, but most buyers attend private individual showings when they're looking for houses. And what you need to know for the second major change is that the responsibility for the buyer's agent compensation has shifted. Historically, our compensation has come from the seller side of the transaction. Under the new rules, the Department of Justice has required that compensation agreements for buyer's agents are made between the buyers and buyer's agent and are negotiable at the time of the offer, meaning that ultimately buyers are responsible for their own agent's compensation. But there's a built-in solution. There's a box right on the purchase agreement that the buyer can instruct their agent to check, requesting that the seller cover the buyer's agent compensation. This is built into the contract for a number of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that some buyers simply can't afford to pay for their own down payment, closing costs, and their realtor. This is why the seller payment of compensation became customary and stayed this way for so long. There may be, however, certain circumstances in which a buyer may actually prefer to compensate their own agent in order to keep their property taxes lower. In fact, we've already actually had clients in the past use this method. And there may be some other cases where the seller side decides to negotiate our compensation. And in that case, we'll be ready to help you through it. So basically, it comes down to more paperwork. But we do expect that much of the way that we do business in the past is going to remain almost exactly the same. Okay, Heather, you're up. Explain to us what's new for sellers.
So the biggest change is the compensation structure that Colin just mentioned. So for sellers, there will no longer be a promise of compensation from the seller to the buyer's agent on the multiple listing service. Instead, buyers will have a separate written agreement with their agent, but we do expect that most buyers will still ask sellers to help them out with that compensation, and some will need it. For those buyers that do need to ask for assistance, especially first-time buyers, there's a new term. Well, it's really an old term, but we're using it a new way, and it's called concessions. So we're going to hear that term a lot more. So since we can't offer compensation on the MLS, what a seller can offer is concessions to buyers to help them with their realtor compensation. To streamline this process, there is now a simple box on the listing forms for the seller to make an offer of considering buyer concessions. And as Colin mentioned, there's that simple box on the purchase agreement now too for buyers to use to then go ahead and request for the seller to assist them with the compensation. So the bottom line for sellers is that we still recommend that you're going to price your house assuming that you're going to be assisting with buyer's agent compensation. And you'll want to do that for a number of reasons. You don't want to scare buyers away by not offering any concessions. It's going to be a much better position for you to price your house higher with the anticipation of paying both the buyer and seller side of compensation than to set your price as if you're not offering concessions, and then if the buyer needs you to compensate them, it'll be harder to get them to come up above your asking price. And by offering the concessions, you're not obligating yourself to any amount. You're not obligating yourself to anything. You're simply sending a message that you're willing to consider concessions, and the amount is negotiable at the time of the offer. And of course, if you have any questions about any of these changes, or you know anyone that's concerned about making a move because of these changes, then just give us an email or a call anytime.
If you're following our channel because you're considering a move to our area, look in the description. You'll see a link to our awesome relocation guide that we put together for you, totally free of charge. And don't forget to like and subscribe.